Today, for economics class, I want to introduce the concepts of demand and supply and show you how to create a demand graph and a supply graph, or the curves, the demand curve and supply curve. First of all, let's take a look at this idea of the law of demand. The law of demand states that if the price is high, then people will want less of it. And if the price is low, people will want more of it. So let's take a look at this on a graph. And I've done a basic graph we call it a demand curve. And the vertical axis we'll call Y. The x-axis is the horizontal axis. And the vertical axis in economics is always price. So we'll label it P for price. We can also use a dollar sign when we're drawing an economics graph. The horizontal axis is quantity. We can also use a Q to indicate quantity. So we're going to draw a graph. It's going to have a point of origin on it as a reference point. And for the demand line, to demonstrate the concept, we're going to put a downward sloping line to the right, and we're going to call this D for demand. What this means is the higher the price, then the demand will be fairly low. If the price drops dramatically, then the demand will be much higher. So the concept of demand, the law of demand is that it will always be downward and to the right on your graph, that if the price is high, people will want less of it. If the price is low, people will want to buy more of it. Then, at some point, we are going to look at the law of supply. Now, the law of supply is different than the law of demand. Here we're talking about people who want to buy something. Let's take a look at the law of supply, and that's where people want to sell something. They want to produce something for sale. And similarly, we will use price for the vertical axis, quantity for the horizontal axis. If you're supplying something to sell, then we are going to draw the graph differently. We are going to draw a supply graph that goes upward and to the right. And the principle is this: if the price is low, suppliers will want to supply less of it. If the price is high, then suppliers will want to supply more of it. And the example I use in the classroom is if gasoline is $1 a gallon, well, then the number that people want to buy will be very high. The quantity will be high. But the amount of gas that people will want to sell is very low because there wouldn't be any profit in it for the refineries to do that. So let's take and put these two graphs together, the demand curve graph and the supply curve graph, and come on over to the demand and supply curve graph together. This now can get a little more complicated because we've added things to this graph. And what we've added is you will notice when you put the two lines together, the two graphs together, there's a place where they intersect. We call that the equilibrium point. At that point is what the market price is, where the price that the customers are willing to pay matches the quantity and price that the suppliers are willing to provide. Hence, it sets a market price. Now, if the price is too high, sellers will want to sell more of it, but customers or demand will be much lower at a high price. And so then the suppliers will be producing a surplus. They'll have too much, they can't sell it. As a result, you find this in department stores or any store where they're trying to cut the price to sell something, is what they're doing is lowering the price until they get to the equilibrium point. Usually those are clearance sales, whether it's at Kohl's or Walmart or whatever store that wants to move their product. What do? They lower the price to find out where the equilibrium is, to get rid of the rest of that merchandise, to get rid of their surplus. Now, there's another situation that causes a surplus, and that is if a government introduces a price floor that is above the market price. The government says, you know what, we want to protect a particular industry. Say it's the peanut industry, and so we will subsidize peanut farmers to grow more peanuts, and the government does this. Well, what happens is the government subsidizes as a price floor the price of peanuts, and more peanuts are produced than what are consumed to protect the peanut industry. So the government purchases this big surplus at taxpayer expense, and they turn it into peanut butter, and where does it wind up? Hospitals, nursing homes, army or military installations, any institution, whether it's governmental, schools, and then if there's surplus, these things go to food shelves for distribution to the public on public food distribution programs. Surplus items that the government has subsidized, and then they don't know what to do with. Same thing happens with milk, for example. The government has a milk marketing orders program where they may subsidize milk. They will guarantee that they will buy the surplus, but then what do you do with milk? Because milk, of course, it only's got a few days before it spoils. So what the government does is it pays to turn it into cheese. Cheese will store for a long time. It will also turn it into powdered milk. What can you pick up off the food shelves? Besides peanut butter, you can get cheese and powdered milk. These are government-produced surpluses where the government said we're going to put a price floor on the product. The suppliers are going to continue to supply this much, but the producers don't, or the demand is not that high, so the government buys it from them and charges the taxpayer for it, and then spins it off on a secondary market. Now let's take a look at what happens if the government puts a price ceiling on something. We know if they put a price floor on something, there'll be a surplus. It happens every time. What if they put a price ceiling? A price ceiling is where the price is low, so the producers don't want to produce, but the price is low, so the people that are buying want to buy it. And what happens in this case if the government says, oh, we're only going to sell gas for $1 a gallon. Everybody wants to buy gas for $1 a gallon. The refineries don't want to sell it, so now there's a big shortage because there's an artificial price ceiling that's below the market price, and we call this area a shortage. You can see this in command economies where the government manipulates the price, and they will put a price floor above the market price, and it will create a surplus of things that we don't want. Or if they put a price ceiling below the market price, they will produce a shortage of the things that we do want. My wife had an opportunity as a college student to go to East Germany when it was under communist rule, and then on to Moscow, where again it was under communist rule when she was a college student. And what did she find in the grocery stores? Empty shelves, because the government guaranteed a low price, but production couldn't keep up with that low price. It wasn't worth it. So it was a constant issue of shortages. And so what I want you to understand are the demand curve is always down and to the right. Now, why do we call it a curve? Is because straight lines are fine for this map, but in the real world, the curve could be a little bit different shape. The same thing with the supply curve. It will always be sloping upward and to the right because the higher the price, the more willing the supplier is to supply it. The lower the price, the less willing the supplier is to supply it. When you put these two graphs together, you find out where the market price is. The point of equilibrium, at that price, the suppliers are willing to sell at that price, and the market has a market price is developed between the buyer and the seller. But understand that a shortage will develop if a price ceiling is below the market. A surplus will develop if the price floor is placed above the market price. You should be prepared for all three of these graphs on any future test for the rest of this semester.